Hello and welcome to Everyday Tarot, your daily dive into the divine wisdom of the tarot. I'm your host, Camille A. Saunders, and today I'll be talking about the Hermit. Whether you're a seasoned tarot reader or just starting to explore, this podcast offers daily insights, intuitive messages, and practical advice drawn from the cards. Each episode is designed to help you connect with your inner wisdom, find clarity in your decisions, and tap into the energy of the universe. Tune in every day, Monday through Friday, for fresh perspectives and empowering guidance from the tarot as interpreted by me. The best way to support the podcast right now is to listen daily, rate, review, and to follow or subscribe in your chosen podcast app. The next best way is to check out my Patreon. Supporting me there will give you early access to upcoming podcast episode topics, digital downloads I've created, and monthly tarot hangouts with me and other listeners. The link will be in the show notes to check that out, and you can always go to my website, CamilleASaunders.com/everydaytarot for all the latest information related to the podcast and to find images of the cards that I pull. Welcome to Season 2 of the podcast. In the first season, I introduced tarot through talking about oracle versus tarot cards, myths of tarot, how to find a deck, reading for yourself versus others, and much more. In Season 2, we're going through the first 13 cards of the major arcana, one per episode, and today I'm talking about the Hermit. So the number associated with the Hermit card is 9, and in numerology, the number 9 is about completion, ending of one cycle and continuing of the next, growth, transformation, spiritual and selfless attitude, and actually we're in a 9-year right now, as 2025 in numerology would be 2, plus 0, plus 2, plus 5, which would be 9. So traits associated with this number are humanitarian, compassionate, kind, intent on putting effort towards the greatest good, and helpers. All right, so for the Hermit card, commonly seen depictions are an old man with like a cane or a walking stick. Often they're lifting a lantern to find their way. And often they're in the woods or some other isolated place. In the Goddess of Love tarot deck, the goddess in the middle is holding a lantern in one hand and a branch with what I think are pomegranates in the other. She's sort of amongst a rocky red background, like kind of looks like lava-esque, with the moon and stars overhead, and there's a broken heart in the bottom left corner of the card. In the Anima Mundi deck, the Hermit is depicted as a common octopus. It's sort of in the center of the card with all of its tentacles spread out, and it's like looking at you very intently. It's a mostly symmetrical looking, and at the top of the card, like the background behind the octopus is like inky black, and at the bottom is more of like a teal blue, maybe like colors of the ocean depicted there. And in the Sasser Abito Tarot deck by Stasia Burrington, it gives very Pacific Northwest vibes. There's like a person perched on what looks like the side of a steep incline, like a side of a mountain, with a snow-covered mountain like in the distance across the way. It looks like it's either sunrise or sunset. There's sort of like a yellow, hazy color like in the valley between the two mountains. And again, I sort of get the impression that they're like a hiker, they've sought out the forest, and where I live in the Pacific Northwest, it's very common for everyone to be into hiking and to spend weekends getting out of the city and into the mountains. All right, so as we get into meanings of this card, I have a book called Fearless Tarot, How to Give a Positive Reading in Any Situation by Elia Adam. So I'm going to look at that first. They talk about that the Hermit symbolizes that the answers you seek at any problem can always be found if you look within. And it talks about really that sometimes people are hesitant to look within due to the discomfort they might find. Very often we distract or avoid resolving any like unbalance within ourselves. And a quote I pulled from this book for this card is, "Thinking about your problems just leaves the anxiety in the background to go unchecked as your mind frantically races from one hollow solution to another. Thinking about discomfort doesn't solve it. Feeling it does." So if you go within and find and feel the feelings that you've been avoiding, you will discover that the discomfort is a wise teacher and friend, which I think is really what this card is about. Like instead of the hermit sort of being like, oh, like an old wise person that, okay, I have to get through all my life to sort of like embody that. It's sort of saying that, like, that looking inside, that feeling your feelings, that sort of examining, like having a curiosity, like the symbol of the lantern, just sort of shine a light in all these dark corners. Um, that really that process is kind of the being wise, the looking at your discomfort as a teacher or a friend, which I really thought that was a great description. So in the Anima Mundi deck, as I talked about, what's depicted is like an octopus. Um, Within the tarot deck guidebook for this card, they talk about that the hermit is about entering a period of self-discovery, evaluating how things are going, like looking inward, introspection. There's also an aspect of like spirituality, solitude, soul searching, meditation, and planning carefully. So a lot of like intention. I pulled a quote from the book as well that says, "You have a desire to seek the truth, so withdraw and take some time to soul search." And again, it's depicted as an octopus, which, if you think about it, like an octopus lives in the depths of the ocean often. We have them here in the Puget Sound, which is an inlet of the Pacific Ocean. It's very cold and dark down there. You need lights to see, like if you're scuba diving, which I know from folks that have scuba dived here. Um, Octopuses are very smart. You've probably maybe ever seen videos where they can figure out how to get out of their enclosures sometimes when they're in like an aquarium setting. They're very good problem solvers. And I've seen octopuses a couple of times. They have one at the Seattle Aquarium, and it's really incredible to see. And whenever I go see it, I always have the impression that it sees me and it knows what's going on. And octopuses, again, if you think about it, they have this sort of like chameleon effect where they can change the color to blend into the background. They can like squish and move their body to imitate other creatures, as well as push themselves into small spaces. So again, they're sort of like adaptable and um, yeah, and just sort of like I think associated with sort of like the murky depths, but also have this like maybe not wisdom, but like intelligence. Um, and I'm sure some aspect of, I'm trying to think of how this connects to like introspection, but they kind of have to know like what their background of the space is in order to change to it. And I don't think we really know how that works. You also think about that they can like squirt um, ink like as a defense mechanism, which again is sort of depicted on this card. Like it's very dark, murky looking waters that they're in. And yeah, it's very interesting. So another one of my decks, the Goddess of Love Tarot deck, um, has a lot of different elements on the card. So as I talked about, there's like a goddess in the middle, and the goddess depicted is Demeter. And in the Tarot deck guidebook for this card, I pulled a quote that says, "To know the goddess is to know the darkness, the void, the womb, the impenetrable nothingness. This is the dark night of the soul. This is the vision that must be carried out at all costs, no matter how isolating." So if you know anything about the goddess Demeter, she's like a mother goddess who rules over the fertility of the earth. Demeter is intimately tied to the cycles of birth and death, as well as love, as reflected in her intense devotion to her daughter Persephone, which I think is probably part of why there's like pomegranates depicted in this image. Those are usually kind of like our symbol for Persephone. And I have this book called The Women's Encyclopedia of Myths and Secrets by Barbara G. Walker. So it's a hefty tome. So you can look up like goddesses or a lot of different things within it about mythology. So in there it talks about that Demeter's spirit was manifest in the final sheath of the harvest, often called the Demeter, the corn mother, the old woman, which I think kind of like aligns with that image of a hermit, or the hermit, sort of being this like wise old person, or like the crone energy. And as I was looking up the like reference for this book so that I could link it in the show notes and on my website, I found out that the woman that wrote it is super cool. I would say. So I have links in the show notes to check out her other written works. I couldn't find a way to actually purchase the book right now, but she actually has like this whole entire list of every tarot deck that she has and like cataloged and all the images, which I just thought was like super cool since this is a tarot podcast. So the link will be in the notes if you want to check her out. This book also talks about that while mourning Persephone's abduction to be Hades' consort, Demeter emerges as the hermit. Venturing through darkness, mourning, and loneliness, her journey persists for half the year as Persephone leaves her mother once again to rule over the underworld. And that's the description in the Goddess of Love tarot deck guidebook for this card. And I thought that was also interesting because we're currently in sort of the underworld part of the year in the northern hemisphere, with it being winter. Again, like Demeter is often seen as like she ventures into the underworld to find Persephone, her daughter, and that because she is associated with like fertility and the harvest and life, that this is sort of like what happens in the winter seasons, that the harvest is over and sort of livelihood of plants and other things that are around sort of go also under, right? Like if you think of plants, like with their roots, they die back often at the top of the soil, but there might still be kind of like life underground that is forming or storing energy, or again, something like going underneath to sort of prepare for the harvest or like seasons where of the plenty. So I just thought that was interesting since we're sort of in winter time, at least in the northern hemisphere. And the astrological correspondence for this card, as talked about in the deck, is Virgo. So Virgo is like associated literally with like the Virgin. Virgos are like an earth goddess. Virgo is an earth sign. Demeter is often seen as a maiden, mother crone, with Kore being like the daughter, and Kore being kind of the like virgin or like maiden energy. So I sort of assume that that's kind of why it's the astrological correspondence of Virgo. And one other quote from this tarot deck guidebook associated with this card, it says, "Solitude is often necessary to understand your own drives and fantasies, as well as what you want out of any sort of relationship. Climb the mountain of your heart to the seat of the goddess and pour your sorrows into her lap." Which is a great transition into the next card, the Sasarabita tarot deck by Stasia Burrington, that really depicts this card as like a lone person up on a mountain. So I just thought that was interesting with the climb the mountain of your heart language there, that like this person is depicted on a mountain. So yeah, in the Sasarabita tarot deck, they give sort of like other names sometimes for the card. So this one's called, otherwise known as the homebody or the seeker. The hermit is on a personal truth-seeking quest. And some quotes from this are, "She is a shamanistic hero finding answers in silence." It made me laugh. This deck is fairly modern, so she talks about maybe turn off your internet for a day or forever. And she kind of says, like, I'm just kidding. But I think that sort of does embody the energy of the hermit sometimes, right? It's not necessarily that you want to like turn off information, right? Like that, maybe those are like the positives of the internet, but maybe turning off, right? Like, or pulling away from the mainstream or like society. Again, if you think of like what we think of as a hermit, and like finding answers within instead of like looking externally for those, which I think a lot of the internet, especially social media, like leads to a lot of comparison, and just really like people really feeling down on themselves, or like, oh, I'm not good enough, like look at that person doing this thing. And so I really enjoyed that she said turn off the internet for a day or forever. because I think that part of that is like, okay, how do you find your own knowing, right? How do you embody your own hermit energy to figure out what it is you want, what values you have, how you want to move forward to like better know yourself. And yeah, another quote from that is the hermit withdraws from society to better know herself. She then must return from isolation to share her newfound knowledge. And I do think that part is maybe not often talked about with the hermit card is that, okay, like there is this time period in which like you can withdraw from society or sort of like maybe not necessarily from society, but just like internally and to focus on your own introspection, spirituality, meditation, like those kind of things. But then you have to sort of like come out of that and like share what you found, right? Not, like sometimes that can be with yourself or maybe making changes for the future, maybe making changes in relationships or work or things like that. But you also have to sort of share what you've learned. Um, and I really like that because it makes me think about sort of part of why I wanted to do this podcast. I love tarot as like an introspection tool, as like a helping me reflect on themes or things that I feel like are going on internally for myself. But I also have been feeling called to kind of like turn what I've learned and like share that. So, right, part of this is sharing it on the podcast. I also have a local meetup group called Let's Talk Tarot, where we have tarot social meetups and also sometimes events. Where I get to talk to other folks about tarot and sort of share knowledge or what we do or how different decks and that kind of thing. And if you're local to the greater Puget Sound area in Washington State, I do have a link for that meetup group in the show notes as well. So for the last couple of quotes from this tarot deck, the Sacerabito tarot deck, it says, "My hermit is a lone hiker, probably somewhere in the beautiful Pacific Northwest," which I love that. Again, sort of gives me those vibes. And this deck often has quotes at the end of sort of the tarot card description. And it says, "The quieter you become, the more you can hear." And that's a Ram Dass quote. All right, so let's dive in and see what the cards have to say today. And as I do that, I'm going to be thinking about these questions of kind of like, what do I need to turn inwards towards? How can I benefit from introspection right now? And maybe what does the lantern of the hermit shine a light on in our current day-to-day life? All right, so I pulled the Ace of Swords, and today I'm pulling from the Lila and Olive Ophelia Rosa Tarot deck. Yeah, so when I look at the card, there's one sword on it and sort of different purpley flowers surrounding it. This tarot deck guidebook is fairly brief. There's pretty much one or two sentences per card. So I'm going to read what it says and then try to sort of interpret what I think that means. So for the Ace of Swords for this deck, it says, "The clarity to cut where sunlight meets shade. Behold, yet beware the double-edged blade." The clarity to cut where sunlight meets shade. Behold, yet beware the double-edged blade. It's very interesting because I feel like it's sort of talking about this. So the sunlight meets shade. So sort of we have the like, sort of that Demeter, like half the season or half the year we're spending in sunlight above ground, and then the other half we're spending in shade or in darkness, sort of below ground or in the underworld. Behold, yet beware the double-edged blade. I feel like when I think of that, it does make me think of the Hermit card of sort of beware that don't just stay in introspection or don't just stay in your thinking mind forever, right? As I talked about with one of the card descriptions earlier, it talks about that you actually have to come back out of that isolation and share that newfound knowledge. It also talks about that sort of like anxiety or like anxious thoughts or spiraling that sometimes if you just stay in the thinking part of yourself, there you might just sort of spiral and focus on those same thoughts over and over and over, and that they're basically saying that that's not really going to get you anywhere, or at least not anywhere helpful. And they really emphasize that you have to actually feel the feelings, right? You have to actually, okay, if you do your introspection, right, and you learn something, you have to actually take action afterwards, right? You can't just go to the woods and be a hermit and stay there forever. You have to kind of come back to society or come back to friends or family or community or even just like the larger world and like share what you've found. Some of that might be sharing again, like how you want to do things differently or in relationship or right, making changes in your life. But that you can't just do like half of the process. I feel like that's what I'm seeing with this, like, beware the double-edged sword, right? It can be great to have that introspection time, but if you only spend all your time in introspection, like, I don't, like, probably nothing's ever going to change if you just sort of think and think and think about it. Okay. So yeah, that's sort of the message that I get today. So links for the tarot decks that I use and talk about will always be in the show notes and on my website if you'd like to look at them or purchase them. And then thanks for joining me today on Everyday Tarot. Just as a reminder, the podcast will come out daily, Monday through Friday for all of 2025. All right, see you soon. Bye-bye.